Ryan Jeffrey, and this is the Passionate About OSS podcast. The purpose of the podcast is to shine a light on the brilliant minds of the OSS and telco industry, to describe some of their background, but also to share some of their fantastic knowledge, tips, and techniques. In today's episode, we'll take a look at how NaaS transformation, or Network as a Service transformation, can revolutionise your OSS and BSS stack. Today's guest has been a passionate evangelist for the telco industry and OSS specifically for decades. Even more specifically, she's now evangelizing the next big thing in OSS and BSS, and that is Networking as a Service, aka NaaS. So much so that she started an organization whose primary purpose is to promote best practices around NaaS transformation. Backing that up, our guest has a wealth of experience working with the iconic organizations in our industry, including Nortel, Newbridge Networks, Alcatel-Lucent, Nokia, Ericsson, Oracle, Analysys Mason, TM Forum, Telstra, and Ciena Blue Planet. Some pretty big names there, important names in our industry. I really share our guest's passion for NaaS and what NaaS can mean for our industry, so I'm really looking forward to hearing from her today. So welcome today to Johanne Meyer.
Thank you, Ryan. I look forward to having our discussion today.
Brilliant. So I first had the pleasure of meeting Johanne on Telstra's award-winning NaaS implementation project around 3 or 4 years ago. I headed up the consulting team that was responsible for building the first POC of that project. With great regret, my employer bundled me off to another project after doing that POC instead of continuing on, but Johanne and the team were able to continue carrying that project forward. That was a really exciting project, wasn't it, Johanne?
Yes, Ryan, but NaaS was still in its infancy stage. Guy Lupo, the founder and pioneer of NaaS, was just starting to test his innovation. I remember the time where he was very secretive about his project. Guy would come in and he would draw on his iPad and talk about his ideas, but you couldn't have a copy. He would just draw things. But later on, he did change his mind and he hired me to promote NaaS in the industry and with the standards organization.
Brilliant. And we'll come back a little bit to NaaS as part of your career journey a little bit later on. But first, I'd like to look back into the earlier part of your career journey. After completing a maths and computer science degree, you joined Nortel when it was still called Northern Telecom. And that was an absolute icon of the Canadian big business at the time. In fact, it accounted for about a third of the total valuation of the Toronto Stock Exchange at one point. Are you able to describe a little bit about what you started working out on, what kind of projects and so forth?
Sure. I think that throughout my entire career, my focus has always been on the management of networks. So actually, after 1 year with Nortel, I moved to Germany and became the support engineer for the management platform of all of Nortel's European X.25 networks. So I upgraded them all from Finland to Ireland to Portugal to Switzerland to France and many networks in Europe. But the one that I would say was very special to me is the fact that I trained the director and her staff to manage the first X.25 network in early 1990 in Ankara, Turkey. It was their first data network. So that was pretty special to me.
That's awesome. And from there, you jumped across to Newbridge Networks, another Canadian tech icon, working with the 46020 Newbridge Network Manager. And the origins of that product can really be traced through to the 5620 SAM, which is really responsible for managing many Nokia access networks around the world even today. That must have been really groundbreaking work at the time too, Johanne.
Absolutely, Ryan. After coming back to Canada, I decided to try something different than Nortel. So I went with Newbridge, and that was truly exciting time. It was so much smaller than Nortel, so you got to do a lot more roles all at once. Mm-hmm. My focus was on adding X.25 and frame relay and later on, of course, ATM. And the first incarnation, that was back in 1994. So the first incarnation was actually called the 4602. which then became the 46020 with Alcatel, because Alcatel were using 5-digit numbering for their product.
Ah, yeah, of course. Yeah.
And this time, my travels to meet customers went beyond Europe into Asia and South America. I even remember Terry Matthews coming down the hall and asking if I could join him and a couple of other people to fly down to Caracas, Venezuela, to meet with the service provider executives, followed by a reception in our local office. So it was all in a day's work, just flying off to Venezuela for the day and back, you know.
Oh,
It
true
was
jet setter.
it was quite amazing back in those days. Yeah, we had an executive jet that would go between, Ottawa and Herndon in the States where our head office was, and you could just take that jet if it wasn't full, basically. So it was quite interesting.
Fantastic. And all I've ever done is got to travel economy class or cattle class. That's awesome, having your own personal jet.
Yeah. Yep.
Newbridge was then absorbed into Alcatel-Lucent. Did that also result in a change of role, a bigger role as Director of OSS BSS in the CMO? And was it more of a public-facing role too, by way of doing lots of presentations at big conferences and summits?
Yeah, so basically, Newbridge was acquired by Alcatel in 2000, and then we merged with Lucent in the late 2006. But while I was with Alcatel, I decided to combine our network management portfolio and revenue and promote that to telecom analysts, such that they could put Alcatel on the map with the analyst community.
Mm.
And this is why the analysts started covering the equipment supplier market in their OSS, because they thought that equipment suppliers, would give the management platform for free. But I was able to show to them that no, we're actually making a lot of money from our EMSs, that we were selling those. And then after that, when Alcatel had a BSS and OSS services team, which I then joined as director of marketing. So instead of just promoting the EMS NMS, then I started adding the revenue that we were making in the BSS and the OSS services. And then once we had the Lucent merger, then I just kept on promoting all of the OSS BSS product and services at conferences and with analysts until the start of the layoffs, basically. So, but we made a lot of revenue in those days. And this is why you will see back in the days of probably 2004 or 5 or 6, around those years, Alcatel had a number one position there.
Mm. And really, really savvy decision in making it and bringing that out to the analysts too, because it would have really differentiated yourselves in the market as well. And we see it even today with many of the equipment vendors, it's equipment first and the software's an afterthought. But Alcatel definitely took up a really strong position back around about that time. And your role as thought leader in the OSS BSS space was clearly blossoming as you were invited onto the board of TM Forum around about this time too. Are you able to describe a little bit more about the impact of this role?
Yes, it was actually great. So I was appointed to the TM Forum board of director back in 2004. And yes, the request came by invitation from the selection committee and had to be approved at the annual general meeting of the TM Forum. And I was part of several TM Forum committees and led the supplier committee, because I worked for Alcatel back then, and then later on Alcatel-Lucent, because after the Alcatel-Lucent merger, the Lucent TMF board representative retired. So I kept the role representing the entire company. So it was a wonderful experience. And I still have many, many friends from that time. I even mentored and lobbied and supported Oracle's head of communications business unit, Doc Soriano, when he was appointed to the TMF board of director after I came back from Canada, or to Canada from Melbourne.
Yeah, and we'll come back a little bit more onto TMF related issues a little bit later in the chat as well. And you touched on coming to Melbourne as well. So here in Australia with organisations like Ericsson and Analysis Mason, was it harder to change the world of OSS BSS from down here in this remote outpost?
It was definitely very hard because Melbourne is a wonderful city to live in, and I really hope that I will be back again, at least back and forth. But it's also very challenging to participate in standards meetings that are more typically geared towards Europe and North America time zones. The time just doesn't suit very well. And you as you know, I'm sure.
Absolutely. 2 a.m., 3 a.m.
Yeah.
meetings with the TM Forum, which I don't attend as many as I would like to or should, but yeah, it's certainly a challenging time zone for us down here. And that was followed by a return to Canada to lead marketing of Oracle's orchestration solutions, which included some award-winning TM Forum Catalyst projects as well. It was probably around this time that the orchestration buzzword was really taking off in the OSS BSS vernacular, even though really, I guess the concept had been around much longer as like flow through provisioning and so forth. But was Oracle introducing any particular innovations that were really shaping the market around that time?
Um, I mean, it wasn't just about orchestration, but it was the time of the ETSI Mano and the VNF management.
Mm.
And well, we all know where that went. But it is at the TMF Catalyst event in Nice 2017 that I actually met with Guy Lupo.
Mm.
And Guy spent over an hour explaining his concept and idea, of course, on his iPad and not being able to show me stuff. And I said, Guy, can I just at least take one picture of one of the drawings that you have? And he let me take one picture. And then on my return flight, I thought about what Guy was trying to explain, and I'm very good at taking notes. I take notes and notes and notes. And then I thought about what he said, and then I summarized it in an email. And then he said that I had explained his idea very well, and he was so happy that I had understood what he was trying to achieve. And in a few months later, after my entire group at Oracle was let go, Guy offered me a position with Telstra.
You're exactly right. It was a really, really interesting concept. And this is where things get really interesting, or at least I think so. And it's the topic of this conversation. So the NaaS journey begins. Are you able to tell us a little bit about why NaaS is such an important concept? So you talk a little bit there about taking some of those notes and getting excited about it just based on some of Guy's visuals, that he's brilliant at articulating his ideas on the iPad as he does. But yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit more about what it is and why it's such an important concept.
Sure. So NAS basically uses open standard technology and vendor agnostic APIs to hide the network details and expose these to the OSS and BSS system as service abstraction. So think about the network capabilities becoming reusable Lego block that form part of a catalog. And then these atomic services can then be used to make up multiple different products and offers. And in fact, if you saw or attended a few of the events that we did, we would bring a set of Lego blocks, and then I remember Guy sitting there, and we had a machine to put labels, and so we would have these labels on our Lego block, which represented different things, and then we would swap the Lego blocks suppliers, or we would change them from PNF to VNF, and ensure that the top layer wouldn't be affected when we change things, just to try to explain the NaaS concept. So it was really creative and an interesting way of trying to get our message across. But today, these days, like every good new technology that comes in, every supplier always want to jump on the buzzword because everybody says, oh, it's NaaS, it's new, or, think about SD1 or even NFV in the old days. But then they try to shape it such that they can reuse it to fit with their product suite. And so you'll hear some suppliers referring to NaaS to describe an on-demand service offered by a service provider, enabled by a virtualized network technology and presented via an enterprise portal, which they enabled, right? But this capabilities is actually more of an external benefit from the internal NaaS concept that Telstra has pioneered and that the TM Forum and ETSI ZSM have formalized, which is the one that I've been working on. So there's quite a lot of revenue and a lot of benefits associated with NaaS because there's so much cost saving and new revenue opportunities for service providers when you think about being able to expose these capabilities with a
separation of concerns.
Yeah, the separation of concerns between the IT and the network by using those APIs, and then it allows you to then upgrade each side independent of one another and so on. It has a lot of cost saving, but not only those things, but then now with having an API gateway in there, it allows you to expose your capabilities not just to your IT teams, but also towards the public and the developers that are like the enterprise or the 5G apps developers and so on. So it allows you to expose your capabilities to those peoples as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The thing that really made it groundbreaking for me, there were two concepts that Guy introduced that were somewhat groundbreaking in my mind. And the separation of concerns was the really big one because, I guess, previously to put a new product into the entire IT stack meant coordinating product and marketing and IT and networks and getting them all lined up, and particularly in the really big organizations where they're very siloed and often very bureaucratic, that separating those out by putting the NaaS shim through the middle of that, basically allowing networks to do their thing and create the building blocks, and then the product and marketing team to come in separately and say, okay, we can use those building blocks and we can create these services. So to me, it was just a revolutionary concept that I really felt was going to significantly reduce time to market of new products, as well as the additional benefits of having the API contracts that people could just go and use at like building blocks. But the other aspect that he built in was really using more of a cloud native concept to really separate it out from a lot of the concerns. So as we know, getting these projects through in really big organizations is often major security hurdles and major bureaucratic hurdles and technological hurdles. So just being able to kind of separate that out and put it into a cloud to do proof of concept and things like that was just a brilliant concept for that particular piece of work. But are you able to tell us a little bit about the Telstra NaaS project and your role within it, the Guy brought you in to be involved with?
So Guy really hired me to help both with the internal and the external education and promotion of NaaS. The problem is that even when we started training internally, what is NaaS and so on, we always had to educate our team, what it means to them and so on. And if the people don't understand why they need it or why is it so good and so on, they become detractors. And they will push back and they will actually put block and start rumors and it just won't go anywhere because then you'll have all of this detractions in the background. And so you really need to promote and to push internally the benefits, for the company overall, and then what roles will everyone play in that transformation? Because otherwise people will also start to fear. They'll have fear about losing their job and what it will mean to them. And then they'll either become non-active or they'll push back fear never brings any good feeling at all. So it was very apropos to actually train them internally. But because Guy is the one that sort of created it, it came from inside. And here's a second thing, is that normally people don't really trust the fact that you've had this idea and it's a great idea, but hey, it involves changing the way things are being done, not just process wise, but also putting in these APIs. And we needed the industry to adopt this to be successful, because if they were only doing it for Telstra, then Telstra would have to pay all the time for putting these changes, these enhancements, and so on. And so my task was not only to try to educate internally, but also to bring the industry to understand the benefit that NaaS would have. And so basically, we started working on a way to say, okay, well, what are the event, the conferences we need to target so that we can speak at those events? And then also, what are the standards or industry collaboration teams that we need to work with to have them understand what needs to happen? The first two I would say that I've worked with was ETSI ZSM, because I realized that this is where there's a lot more. ETSI brings the crew of the suppliers that are more network focused. You'll have the telecom equipment suppliers more than you'll have the OSS, BSS, because NaaS, the original target of NaaS is really the network, and that the fact that the network is now exposing their network capabilities. But if you think about the TM forum, yes, it does have the APIs, but it doesn't have the community of the network suppliers. Mm-hmm. And so to influence the network suppliers, I had to go to a standards group that had more of those target audience within it. And just at the same time, this ETSI Zero Touch Service and Network Management group was just starting. Mm. And so it was a great opportunity for me to influence by bringing in the requirements that Telstra had that would lead to NaaS and influence that group. And if you look at their architecture, they basically have a NaaS architecture. And so we did great work with them in doing that. And so now from that architecture, ETSI ZSM went on to look at doing more like closed loop architecture, but still taking into account the abstraction, how to expose things northbound, and using standard APIs in between.
I love the real strategic nature of that change approach. So often projects in this space fail because of a lack of change management planning, but there were so many layers of the thinking that you and Guy brought together around that change management, because it is a significant shift in the way of working, the way things are done currently. But I think it's important for that separation of concern that we talked about earlier. And as we mentioned earlier, it was an award-winning project. Are you able to describe what some of the project's greatest achievements were and why it was award-winning?
Well, we actually had, in terms of award-winning, we actually made sure that we got data. I mean, I kept on asking the team to give me some data that would justify time saving, benefits, and so on. And we did have some solid data around the savings, okay? And because of that, then we were able to then submit for winning some awards. And we won a number of awards from 2017, 2018, and 2019 was where we won several awards for NaaS, not only with Catalyst, but we had one award with Layer 123, and we also had in 2018 and 2019, we had two different TMF Excellence Award. And my task was also to involve a lot more senior executive within Telstra to recognize the involvement of people within Telstra. And then in 2019, we had the new head of networks that went to the TM Forum and received that award.
Yeah, no, I remember that one vividly. So you clearly spotted the importance of what this project, or perhaps NaaS more generically, offered to the telco industry, because you then formed NaaS Compass. Are you able to tell the listeners a little bit more about NaaS Compass, what it does, how it serves, and who it serves?
Sure, of course. NaaS Compass offers strategic advisory services and comprehensive governance framework and provides the first NaaS transformation and NaaS API online training courses. So the primary target is the service provider community. It is vendor agnostic and represents all the work that was done in the standards group. As Guy also put in a quote, is the fact that he wished he would have had this NaaS Compass training when he started NaaS, as he spent at least 6 months educating people on NaaS. And every time you had a new person, you had to re-explain what that was. And he said he wasted so much time in just doing training because there was always, new people coming on board trying to convince. I mean, you had a lot of people. If you think about all of the different network groups and then the IT teams and so on, you had a lot of people to educate and convince of the benefits and why they should do that. Because people are reluctant on change, of course. It always change, always bring some fears. And so the longer it takes to educate people, then the more, they're afraid of losing their jobs and the risk and so on, right? So there is nothing else today like a NaaS Compass in the market for service providers contemplating a NaaS transformation and what it involves. So we offer all sorts of online training and a tool that basically provides them with all of the major project, all the things they need to look at. So for example, would you have thought that you should create an intranet to make sure that you have all of your domain, knowing where to find the information, maybe having the postman script to test their APIs, the status of the API gateways. And, there's so many things that needs to happen, that I have created this program management that basically list all of the tasks that should happen to do the discovery side and build your business case, then to do the planning. For example, how to set your metadata model. What are the terminology you're going to use between the network and IT, and agree on those things. And then to do the execution, what needs to happen. So NaaS Compass encompasses all of those things together.
Also, you described a lot of the task that Guy spent that 6 months teaching new people and so forth. A lot of that was a really hearts and minds type exercise by the sounds of it. And what you described about the courses, they're quite technical in nature and very, right brain. Is there also those elements of the hearts and minds for somebody who has to be the project champion and really drive the significant change around NaaS, and giving them the tools to win the hearts and minds in amongst that as well?
Yeah, so what we offer is the overview course, which is not as in-depth as the technical courses, but provides you with a really good overview. And we can customize these such that a service provider saying, okay, well, this is what we're going to be doing. Then we can customize it to put their logo, their branding, and so on. And then they can push it, because service provider will always make a business case. And then from the business case, they will want to say, well, this is what we want to do, right? We're doing it because of ABC. This is what we're trying to achieve by doing this. In the training courses, I have a number of videos that I show. And that, for example, AT&T did such a short video as to why they want to do NaaS, which they presented when we did our Catalyst together at the TM Forum last year. And they said, okay, well, our focus, this is why we're doing NaaS, and this is the focus for it, and so on. So every service provider will do NaaS for a certain reason. Maybe a Vodafone is typically more focused at addressing the developers. They really want to go after the developers because they're so global. Whereas, others may want to focus more on the cost reductions, and they're doing NaaS because they want to remove all the custom APIs that makes up all this spaghetti mess of APIs that you have that cost so much money, which hinder you in trying to move forwards and so on. So everyone will have a different reason why they would want to do NaaS. Maybe it's both as well, but it allows us to talk about the benefits and then also customize it so that they can reuse this to promote it internally within their own organizations.
Yeah, really brilliant point, because Hearts and Minds is so different within different organizations, and the org chart, the politics, the technology stacks, and so forth. So yeah, really
It's
valid point
amazing
there.
the politics that this will encounter.
Yeah, oh, absolutely, and I guess that's the really important factor around the separation of concern as well, is to break that apart so that there is less friction between silos, and it allows the silos to operate within their own silo to a bigger extent than currently.
Exactly. I mean, this is another big, huge benefit. Talk about, not just cost reduction, but the fact that they'll have the separation of concern and they all work towards just an API. And so changing, a release or an upgrade version, whether it's northbound or southbound to that API, you only have to test against that API and make sure that it works.
Yeah,
Instead
you're not.
of all the spaghetti that you'll have to test for your regression testing.
Yeah, and where the spaghetti also includes people and not just the IT stack, but the spaghetti that we are as people in these organizations. So from the outside looking in, I can see you've spent a stack of time developing content and course material to serve this market. So firstly, congratulations and thank you for doing that on behalf of the industry. But more importantly, are you able to tell us a little bit more about the courses that you have available? You've touched on them a little bit in the earlier statements, but yeah, can you describe the courses and syllabi?
Yes, so the first is, as I was saying, the NaaS Compass course is the overview is a 15 minutes on NaaS transformation that is for everyone. To understand what NaaS transformation really means and the benefits. But then I have two other technical courses that are more in-depth around the NaaS transformation and around the NaaS API. So what are the APIs that you will need when you're thinking about doing the lifecycle management of the services that are going to be exposed? The network domain now needs to handle all of those APIs. So you'll have the fulfillment APIs, you'll have the assurance and the testing, and you'll have your service problem management, service qualifications, and so on. So we have the list of APIs that we recommend. It doesn't mean that those are the only thing. Of course, we start from there and then you can grow as you need to. And in actual, the version 5, we will probably add more APIs, but those are the basic one that we should have to fulfill the full life cycle. And then the course goes on into talking more about the principles and NaaS principles and the best practices that are extracted from experience and work in the TM forum, and where we create NaaS specification and in the API project.
Yeah, and the API is a really important part of it too, because I guess the NaaS is really driven by APIs, and just having that internal API shim, I guess, for want of a better word, is quite different than the way it may be done currently. And the fact that it's building on the Open API project of TM Forum, which maybe not all telcos are using just yet. So I can see exactly why it's so important to have that as a big part of the course. And I assume that the material has been really battle hardened, built upon the learnings of projects like Telstra's and like the productization of NaaS within the Ciena Blue Planet project and others as well.
Yes. So what we're doing is not only include our experience at Telstra, but also the NaaS asset that we are building currently in the TM forum. So such as the IG-1224 NaaS service fulfillment guideline. I lead this particular project, but I do have involvement from NB & Co. and Telstra and Telenor, and we had AT&T and so on. So we do have people that are coming in and joining us, and then we build this on contribution, and we're at starting version 4 of this particular document. At the same time, right now, we're doing another piece of work that talks about the open digital architecture. So this is the flagship of the TM Forum. And what the TM Forum is doing is creating transformation guides And so helping service provider understanding how they can use the TM Forum assets. And so we have now started to work on it's called IG-1228 ODA flow with NaaS, and it's currently being written. And in there we show how you would do something, but in a NaaS way, as opposed to a traditional way of doing things. Then the other thing that we have, which I also lead, is the TM Forum 909, TMF 909 NaaS API Component Suite. And of course, I've done a number of NaaS catalysts. But NaaS Compass also has advisors, such as Guy Lupo, and I do have consultants. So, for example, when we created the NaaS API course, I had Pierre Gauthier to consult with us to create that course. Pierre leads the TMF API architecture, and basically we used his consulting to make sure that the course was accurate.
I really share the passion for the potential of a NaaS transformation as well. We talked about a little bit earlier on about the importance of standing up business cases as well around this. And are there any particular metrics or outcomes that you really feel NaaS transformations can drive? And maybe what are the key pillars of transformation within business cases that you see?
So I think one of the best one, and because you'll be able to read it or to listen to it, is the AT&T Catalyst results for key metrics that they estimated based on a complex NaaS wavelength service. So they decided to look at doing their first project, on something that is very manual today, that you have a lot of swivel chairs, that is very complex to create the wavelength service. And they said, well, if we can apply NaaS to this, let's just see how much benefits we would gain from that. And so from their estimates of how we basically took a wavelength service and how we decomposed it into a set of atomic services, how this would then apply the APIs from that perspective. Then they basically looked at it and said that it reduces their operational efficiency by 40%, including process time and order form rationalization. Because remember, we are trying to hide the how we do things. And so they don't need to fill in all of those extra attributes that were really resource level focus, because now the network, you just send them the intent of saying, I want this, and it will decide which supplier and how it will deliver this. And so your order forms for the operator to fill in is a lot simpler. You're also reducing the time to bring new services to market and time to revenue by 50% from their estimation, from the way they're doing things today with the way that NaaS would be able to allow them to do it. They believe it would reduce an order file out and swivel chair by about 40%, and enabling telco to expose their network capability more easily to third parties. So if you think about how you would be able to expose things to third party, or even think about it, if you were doing NaaS today, and all service providers would be doing NaaS, so they'd expose their capability northbound through TM Forum APIs, and then you want to merge with another company, or you're acquiring another company. Imagine then suddenly this other company all expose their services through APIs, and you just plug that in because they all use the same APIs. And so your northbound, suddenly your product portfolio just increases. You will consolidate your product offerings, and then you can just send your requests through all of these sets of APIs. So NaaS, in fact, will really help in so many ways.
Absolutely. Building the catalog building blocks on top of that gives so much flexibility to the really creative marketing and product types to really go their hardest and make all these innovative products and bundles, but without having a significant impact on network and the IT and network orchestration that sits underneath it, which is really interesting. Now, we briefly touched on some of your potential customers at NaaS Compass. How would you describe your ideal customers? Obviously, carriers are on the list, but would you also put vendors as well, and maybe even SIs as being targets or potential customers for NaaS Compass?
Well, I admit my initial target's definitely been the service provider market because I was trying to be very vendor agnostic, in fact. Suppliers, if you think about the suppliers, they sell to either the IT side of the house or the network sides typically. Their goal is to sell products and not guide service providers on how to transition to NaaS and getting caught up in the service provider's politics. I even had one supplier telling me recently that since they had a multi-vendor NMS, which could manage and select the resources, that meant that service providers didn't need NaaS. So there's still a lot of education that needs to be done because suppliers tend to only view their little bit, but they don't see all the politics and everything that is involved inside of a service provider's regulations. There's so many things that impact even how they get their budget, who gets the budget, why they get their budget, and NaaS will come into there and suddenly reduce a lot of the budget, right? Because they don't need as many SI. And the SI budget, let's just say, used to be padded so that they could use a bit of that money to do other things in terms of maintenance and so on. And they have no view in that and how the organization and the power play of the organization. So maybe one domain is in charge of, let's just say, transport or IP or media. And the way that they get their funding, they may take on something else that normally they wouldn't, just so that they get the project, the overall project, so that they can get more money, more budget around this. Suppliers don't see all of those things. And so it's very hard for a supplier to come in and say, here, I'm recommending how you should organize yourself for NaaS and what your domain should or should not do and so on. I mean, their goal is to sell a product, right? And they don't need to get involved in all the politics. So my course was really trying to target the service providers themselves. But from my experience with suppliers as well, I think my next project will be to create a course for the supplier community because we really complement each other. Because everything that we do in the standards and NaaS Compass is about the internal organization of the suppliers with building new processes, new principle, and best practices for the transition. And I want to work with supplier so that I can help them in positioning for their product as to where they fit so that they can either sell NaaS on there and position it, where they fit. Think about NVMano and everybody says, well, I fit here and I do this bit and I do that. And so I would like for them to say, well, I support NaaS because I have ABC, right? And so I think that we really complement each other. I will work with the organization and how the organization needs to transform, how they do their whole business case and so on. And then the supplier can then sell and understand how to sell their product in there, because I am not trying to promote one supplier over another. I think my next project would be the suppliers. And then what we offer is that we do a bundle of 10 students for both technical courses. I offer then a 90-minute session with each instructor to allow for a Q&A. And actually, I had a really good session this morning with a group of 10 students who were looking for guidance on where to start their NaaS transformation and how to create that business case to justify the investment. And, it's hard to then say, I want to do NaaS and put a big number because we have to change everything. Whereas, well, maybe we do NaaS here and this much of it, and then we get the funding for that because that's going to be a lot easier than going with a big bang transformation. And so things like that, we offer service providers some consultancy to help them.
That makes a lot of sense too. And promoting that standardization of their northbound interfaces and their orchestration, like network orchestration type capabilities, I think would be an important part of them coming along the journey to facilitate NaaS and become standardized and just bolt straight into the concept of NaaS for others to use further up the stream. But The part that was really,
I'll give you another thing that I found along the way is when I started getting involved with the Catalyst with AT&T. The first thing they were telling me is like, we're talking to all of our different network team, and we're telling them that they need to implement the TM Forum APIs and so on. And I get so much pushback. I said, well, that's because you're not selling NaaS. You go to them and you're saying, well, they have to implement TM Forum APIs. And the first thing they'll go back is they say, well, I already have APIs. What's so different? Why do I need the TM Forum APIs? And the point is that you don't go in and say, well, we're doing NaaS, and so you need to put in the TM Forum APIs, because the network team will go, TM Forum what? Right? They've never come across the TMF really. I mean, they may come across an ETSI, or they'll come across 3GPP, and they'll come across maybe a MEF. But TMF, I mean, that focuses on the OSS BSS. And so coming to them and saying, well, we want you to replace all your APIs and put TM Forum APIs is not the right approach. And you have to position it in the proper light so that they come along with you and they don't push back and say, oh, that's so stupid. Why should we do this? We already have APIs. What's so different with those APIs, right? And that's not at all the purpose of NaaS.
But I guess that non-standardized nature of those APIs is the whole driver, so reducing the integration tax. And George Glass, the CTO of TM Forum and ex-executive with BT, articulated that really well in our previous podcast, actually, episode 17, around the whole open API initiative that TM Forum is doing. So
absolutely. And I listened to George as well. And George will tell you that George and Laurent and Lester together, but they're from the IT side. So they were very, very well aware of TMF, because that's typically the team, their CIOs, they come from that side, not the network group.
Yeah, really valid point. And it was really interesting too that you raised the challenge around budget. And I guess that's where the separation of concern again comes into play, that if you can separate marketing from IT from networks, it means each one of them have got their separate budgets, whereas in the standard mode of operation today, standing up a new product requires all three of them to coordinate, and often to get coordinated budget and just different budget cycles. They don't necessarily all line up. So a really important point that you made there about just by separating things out makes you more likely to be able to get the budget for whoever's driven to make a change, whether that's a marketing team or a networking team wanting to drive change. So a really important call.
A lot of their budget won't be used as system integration anymore. They can be used for more innovation.
Yeah, yep. And technology change and things like that. So, yeah, really important call out. Now, we've touched also on you're an active participant in and also a distinguished fellow of the TM Forum. Do you still hold an official role there?
Yeah, because I lead the IG1224 NaaS project. I'm also responsible for the TMF 909 NaaS API component suite and also some other individual APIs. I'm also a judge in the upcoming Excellence Award.
Yeah, fantastic. And do you
I won't tell you which one.
And do you see TM Forum as holding a really important place in the future development of NaaS, especially, I guess, around the open APIs? Is that a key driver behind what you're looking to achieve as well?
Well, the open API is definitely a key part of NaaS, but with the IG 1224 work that we are doing there, we are explaining a bit more about how NaaS is about and the separation of the production layer and how it talks to the core commerce layer, which is the BSS side and the OSS side, and how they interact through the API gateways, and they call it decoupling and integration in the ODA terminology. And so I think that the TM Forum, certainly this is where I have spent a lot more time in promoting NaaS, and the service providers that are working around NaaS will find a lot more information in that level than they would in any other standards group. Now, I was just requested a couple of months ago to speak at a layer 123 event. And I was requested to speak at the ETSI ZSM. They had a special workshop, and they asked me to present why you would use ETSI ZSM. And basically, the point is that to put in an ETSI ZSM, which is really a NaaS architecture, if you want, why would service provider change their current implementation of the way it exists today, even though, it's very inefficient and so on? Why would they change it? And to me, one of the main reasons for changing something that's up and running is for either cost saving, or you need to change it to address a new market, right? It makes you more efficient and so on. And to say that I'll go and implement a ETSI ZSM architecture, you'll have that. But also the fact that a NaaS architecture will now also be a perfect start for your autonomous network, which I know that George also talked about. But think about it, right? If you, from your network technologies or capabilities that you're exposing, and let's say you're exposing a TV service, and you're exposing a transport service, and you're exposing a cable service and so on. And if you can abstract this, and they can all be ordered, assured, and billed for and so on, using the same APIs, then you have that same concept to be able to do autonomous network, because now you're addressing these things independent of the technology, because the technology becomes just the payload of it. And suddenly it allows you to build a foundation also for your autonomous network, because you're really agnostic of technology to be able to do things in a more automated way. Yeah, I think it's just a great way to move forwards. And so to me, the TMF is a great place to start building on all of those things. And NaaS plays a big role for that.
Yeah, and just as you were talking through that too, it sort of made me feel like it also facilitates the different layers of orchestration, so service orchestration, business orchestration, network orchestration, by kind of having those breakpoints through the stack now as well. That at the moment is all just, as you said earlier, that's kind of the spaghetti mess. But now you have those breakpoints that facilitates better orchestration as well. So as you've been talking through, clearly you're involved heavily with some of the standards bodies. It seems like you're probably the linking key between MEF and ETSI and TM Forum and so forth. And it seems to me that NaaS really has affinities with across all of those. And in my mind, at least, in a perfect world, collaboration between these standards bodies would see, say, the service definitions defined by MEF, just like they have for carrier Ethernet, and then piggyback onto some of the great work that TM Forums, Open APIs, NaaS, ODA standards have been doing. How do you see the two organizations, or maybe throw in ETSI as well, and the three organizations working together to all contribute and bring a great outcome across NaaS?
Actually, we are really making progress. When I was with Telstra, I was helping the wholesale people participating in the MEF, and at that point, the MEF had decided they weren't going to be using the TMF APIs, but they had moved away from that, and so I was really pushing to realign the MEF and the TMF and saying, look, guys, the MEF should be the payload, the technology payload, and reuse the TM Forum APIs. And I got Vodafone and I got Orange, and Orange was already in there trying to fight their way. But anyway, I got Telstra and I got lots of other service providers. And then we finally created, that was in February of last year, the last meeting that we had in Lisbon, our team action week before the COVID took around. And there we decided to start a MEF TMF project in particular. And anyone who's a member of either organization can attend the weekly calls. And of course, Ryan, it would be at 2 a.m. for you. So you're more than welcome. If you've got an insomnia that night, you can join us. The work is slightly more complicated than what you think it might be, but the point is that the MEF why they had diverged is because the MEF wants to ensure that there's no misunderstanding in the definition of the API envelope. But the TM forum always tried to make it more generic, such that, yes, you can reuse that API for doing anything in particular, even though it's fulfillment. You've added over the years a lot of attributes that you can reuse to do certain things, or helping with certain technologies and so on, right?
Or IoT or smart cities or any of these other parallel universes.
But MEF, because you want to do service provider to service provider, either at a product layer or at the service layer through interlude and so on, you want to be able to make it more strict. You want to be able that there's no misunderstanding in the definition of each of those attributes that are there, and that the choice is obvious, right? Yeah, it's either this or that, or here's an array of this is your choices are this or blah, blah, blah. All right. You really want to remove anything that could be optional or misinterpreted. And so basically what we are working on now is that the TMF is doing something to standardize or putting together a framework such that now it's going to work. That framework will not just work with MEF, but it will be able to work with other standards organizations such as ETSI, such as 3GPP, and so on. And so the MEF, the TM forum is really looking at putting the real framework for the reusability of their API, but letting different organizations making it tighter so that it can support their needs. And we will have that framework available for version 5.0 of the TMF API. So right now, we've updated most of the APIs. They should be all at 4.0. There's still a few stragglers, but most of the APIs are at 4.0. And we are also creating version 5.0, which also correspond to the OAS 3.0 that we're going to be supporting instead of Swagger 2.0.
Oh, it's fantastic to hear that the collaboration has really moved forward. I felt like, well, they have separate intent in a way previously, so it's great to hear that they're starting to really bring the efforts together, and would imagine that you've been a significant part in bringing those worlds together as well, so fantastic to hear. Now, some of your earlier marketing roles and TM Forum involvement appear to have really given you a lot of opportunity to speak directly with customers, such as at conferences, but also like you talked about going down to Caracas. I feel like a lot of customer concerns of the past are still concerns today. As an industry at OSS, BSS and now NaaS, we've come so far, but there still really seems to be so many ways in which we can improve. You're able to talk about maybe what are the biggest challenges that you're really hearing being raised by industry? Are they the same ones? Are they new ones? Any beliefs that you hold that appear contrarian to the rest of the industry, perhaps?
I'd say, Ryan, that has a lot more NaaS knowledge than when we started the industry conferences in Melbourne, when we hosted at Telstra and TMF back in 2018, which I believe you attended a few of those.
I did indeed.
So
a little bit easier than 2:00 in the morning. So yeah, they were through the day, which made it easier.
They were local, yeah. So I think that back then it was still a paper thing. People didn't think that it could happen and so on. But we pushed through. I mean, Guy really pushed the team, creating the NaaS API gateway within Telstra, and then getting the network team to participate and the IT team to see the benefits of it and so on. And I think that we've certainly moved the needle, and all the industry conferences that I've been promoting and pushing the words, and then starting the work within the TMF and the ETSI and the MEF and so on. And I think there's a lot more out there. And sometimes it's really weird because, for example, the customer that took my course, I hadn't a clue that they were doing NaaS. And this morning, actually, I asked them, I said, well, where did you find NaaS Compass? And they said, oh, we did a Google search. Oh, Okay. So we did a Google search and we found you. We found that you did all the things, and then we saw about NaaS Compass, and then we signed up for the courses. Like, oh, okay. And there I thought it was from my LinkedIn, but I didn't recognize any of the names of the people that took.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, maybe it was somebody else who forwarded to them, but no, it was just a pure Google search. So think about that.
Yeah, so
Um,
there's a real groundswell, obviously, of NaaS. So I was kind of thinking, same as
it,
you,
it,
that
it
it would
is,
be a
it is,
big.
yeah, yeah. I had somebody forwarded me an email from somebody else in it's a U.S. Telco, and they came up to me and said, okay, so what is NaaS? Where can I find the proper information about NaaS and so on? I hadn't a clue these guys were doing NaaS either,
Mm,
and so I think that suppliers are talking about NaaS. I know certainly Ciena Blue Planet, and I would say Greg Tilton, another one that you did a good interview with. He also was great. I mean, we did Greg from Digit,
mm,
and he was part of our early on, I guess, sandbox at Telstra. So we have a few of suppliers that are promoting NaaS, and then after
mm.
that, service provider go, well, what is NaaS? And then they do their searches, and then they start thinking about it, and they somehow reach to me somewhere. But sometimes I approach service providers because through TM Forum and so on, and I'd say, why aren't you doing NaaS? And I say, oh, well, we're thinking about NaaS, but we're not ready to start yet.
Mm,
And there's no doubt that NaaS is a significant transformation, but it's also what's going to provide the biggest bang for the buck spent. I
mm,
mean, continuing with today's course of action will not deliver on the agility that the service providers need to have to
mm,
compete against the hyperscalers or support the developers and the 5G application market opportunities that's coming about. Even to support the scale that will be required, they can't do that by hand. They need to put in automation. And what are they waiting for? I'm just not sure. Maybe they think it's too hard and they don't even want to try. I'm not sure, but there's still a lot of resistance because maybe they think that they need to have a big, huge budget before they can start NaaS. Not 100% sure, but certainly I do get the time where we're not ready to start yet. But you know what? The hyperscalers is going to steal their customers away
mm,
because to take over a year to produce something or being able to tell your customer, sorry, we can't do it because it would cost us too much money to do the small transformation that you're asking. If I think about changing something in my network and I have to be able to change it equivalently in my OSS, and that means it's a big, huge project and that will cost too much money. And I have to tell my customer, sorry, we can't do that change.
mm.
Whereas with NaaS, you'd be so much more agile. You'll be able to do things so much faster. You'll be able to do a test right now with your sandbox. And whatever you're going to create for your sandbox, you'll be able to put live and your pre-production and then your production because your API stays the same. And then you'll be able to bring your customers, show them that, ask them for their feedback, and then do an agile ways of production. Say, do you
Mm.
like this? No. Would you like, oh, you want to change it here? Well, let me work on that. We can change it. It allows them to suddenly become more, agile like in their product and what they can
Mm.
deliver to the market.
And really important too. And one of the things that I feel like one of the big opportunities for the telco market is dealing with big business managed service offerings. So whether it's the banks, the miners, and so forth, who have their own unique requirements. At the moment, it's really hard to make those transitions or give that flexibility to just maybe change a service offering in a small way. It becomes an extensive stack through all that spaghetti mess to make a change for some of those really big, really important type companies. But with NaaS, it gives them the flexibility to do another slight variant on that service offering that is customized for the really big and demanding customers too.
Well, actually, Guy, when we were still at Telstra, I mean, he would go to the banking industry and they wanted NaaS themselves because they
Mm-hmm.
said, we have the same issue. The different issue in terms of it's not scaling of, number of subscribers or anything like this. But it was the fact that they wanted to put in, so for example, I guess it was sort of a firewall software, to be able to understand where your firewall needs to happen across all of your different business unit. And they said it would cost us too much money to try to do the adaptation into all of our domains. And so if they could have that firewall being able to expose their services so that any of the domains could then consume it, then suddenly it made the business case. So NaaS, it doesn't have to only be for service providers, but it also be beneficial for enterprises.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not sure that I guess most carriers are probably thinking about those APIs as an internal API, internal contract for them to use. But I really feel like some of the opportunity is externals, like whether that's third parties or trusted developers or partners, or potentially to go to those big organizations that have they want to develop their own customized portals or own customized bundles of offerings that they want to do. So I think that's a huge opportunity around it for sure.
Yeah, if you look at the Telstra NaaS video, okay, it will see that in the future they see that they want their customers to be able to come in and being able to consume their services. Yep.
Yeah.
And I was part of one of the future roadmap for NaaS.
Yeah, and I guess one of the things that we've talked about too is there's possibly that thought process that we're talking about fulfillment or activation of services, but really the continuation of that is into the network service assurance as well, and also the autonomous networks that you talked about earlier. Do your courses go into that sort of follow on the network service assurance and the autonomous networks as well?
I haven't gone further on the autonomous network because really, even the TM Forum is starting on that roadmap.
Mm,
So it is definitely in presentation and conferences. I have talked a bit about how NaaS will lead for the autonomous network and so on. But to do a course, I have to really teach about what's out there, what's the definition of autonomous network. And right now the TMF has created a couple of white papers. You'll see my
mm,
name on the white paper. And we talk about, here's 5 different level of autonomy and where are you on that and
mm,
how can you move the needles and what are you doing and things like that. And they also working on the area of intent base. And so there are
mm,
information guides of the IG-1253, I believe is the number, where they providing the definition of what is meant by an intent-based APIs and intent-based request and all of those things. So it's work in progress. And so we haven't gone too far that, but we are adding more information even on the IG-1224, which is the NaaS. Today is called the service fulfillment, but in this version of v4.0, we are hoping together that the NaaS team, are going to be adding more information from a assurance point of view and looking at it from performance management and SLAs and service problem and things like that. So
mm.
we are adding stuff, and as we get an approval, then I will bring that back into the course. I don't want to
Mm.
necessarily go with something that hasn't been sort of ratified. So.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense, and that's what I expected would be the case as well. So, yeah, so we're getting really close to the end here of the interview. Are there any real last pearls of wisdom that you would leave or want to leave with people, either starting out the journey on NaaS or maybe just even OSS, BSS in general? Any pearls of wisdom you've garnered over the years?
Everybody should just take the NaaS overview course. It's really cheap. It's not a lot of money, but get a view of what NaaS really means. Because again, in the industry, you will find different version of what NaaS is, and the fact that it's a constant learning journey. Everything evolves, and it's a great time to be there. it will definitely deliver the benefits that you're expecting. So I think that we've covered a lot of the basis on this podcast of what NaaS transformation and what it's about. I'm not sure that I can think of anything else.
And the thing that's exciting too is that the courses will have a lot of the hard-won learnings from some of these projects that have definitely been big transformation changes, and changes don't come without their challenges. So it's great that you're covering that, the processes, the frameworks, all of the building blocks that make up a NaaS transformation. So if people wanted to continue the conversation with you, Johanne, where can they find you?
Well, they can definitely find me on NaaS Compass, www.naascompass.com, or find me on LinkedIn, and just make sure you spell Johanne with an H.
Fantastic. I'll include those in the show notes for people to jump on board. So thank you very much for being a guest on today's podcast, and really enjoyed the insights. There's been some fantastic stuff in there today, Johanne. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure to join you on this podcast, Ryan. Thank you very much for having me.
Been brilliant to have you on. Thanks again, and thanks also to the audience who've been listening in, and look forward to getting another episode out to you shortly. Thanks for listening to the Passionate About OSS podcast. You can find more episodes, more than 2,500 blogs, and our contact details over at passionateaboutoss.com.